2, 3, the third column. On the third column, I can see imprint evidence. Column number 3, 1, 2, 3. I can see imprint evidence. Column number 1, number 2, number 3. I can see imprint evidence along this column.
Now, Dr. Lee, in terms of the imprints that you described for us before on the envelope, the piece of paper, on the jeans, are those consistent with having been made in blood?
Bleeding.
Sustained.
With respect to blood, right, are the imprints consistent with having been made in blood?
Yes.
Now, are there methods that are available to a forensic scientist when examining imprint evidence at a crime scene that have been made in blood to visualize them?
Yes, so-called enhancement technique.
Now, calling your attention again to 583A, and the scene is depicted here. What techniques could have been used on June 13th with respect to enhancing imprint evidence here?
Beyond the scope, irrelevant.
Sustained.
All right. What techniques are you talking about for enhancing imprint evidence made in blood at a crime scene?
Beyond the scope and irrelevant.
Sustained. Was not in response to a question, that statement. There's also a line of, we discussed this before, Counsel.
Mr. Goldberg asked you about techniques that can be used in terms of photography for visualizing imprint evidence or potential footprint evidence at the crime scene. You recall those?
This takes the testimony.
Oral.
Yes, I recall
right.
those.
In your opinion, and you were asked questions about what you did on June 25th. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Vague, overbroad leading.
Oral.
Motion to strike.
In terms of what rulers you were able to lay out? Do you remember that?
Yes.
All right. And what were the proper techniques for photographing and visualizing imprints? Remember
Yes,
those
Overbroad,
questions?
misstates the testimony.
Oral.
All right. Now, Dr. Lee, in your opinion, with adequate time, what techniques can be used to enhance and visualize and photograph imprint evidence?
Same objections beyond the
Sustained.
scope.
Sustained. You can go into the photographic aspects of it.
Well, if you mentioned something called a tolidine,
Yes.
is that an enhancement
Beyond the scope.
technique?
Sustained.
All right. If an enhancement method such as otolidine is used,
Sustained. No. Sustained.
are there techniques that can be used so that when photographing imprint evidence, there can be better visualization?
Sustained.
May we approach, Your Honor?
No. We're not going into other techniques.
It's not a question of other techniques, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Dr. Lee, you indicated that you were asked questions about the color of imprint evidence you saw on the walkway on pictures you took on June 25th compared to photographs that you saw on June 13th. Do you recall those?
Misstates the testimony.
Oral.
Yes, I
Right.
do recall.
Now, assume that imprints have been made in blood. What effect does the passage of time have on the color of imprints?
When start aged, it become grayish and bluish, darker color.
And would an imprint that was made lightly in blood on one day, when examined 14 days later, appear darker than it did when first left?
Speculation.
Foundation.
When you say that imprint evidence in blood gets darker over time, what is the basis of that opinion?
Basically, the protein and heme of the hemoglobin start react. Oxidation process, it become more visible. Initial deposit is less contrast, less visible, unless you enhance it. If aging, this aging processing will make it more visible.
So, in other words, over time, as the proteins degrade, the imprint becomes darker and more visible?
Bleeding.
Sustain.
If I understand your testimony correctly, I can't do that? I'm not.
You understand it. Ask a question.
All right. So, what is the relationship between the breakdown in protein and the color of imprints made in blood over time?
In order to see it, to recognize it, you have to distinguish from the background color versus the imprint pattern color. If two colors are very close, sometimes human eyes cannot resolve it. You can't see it. You photograph, you cannot take the image. However, when the time goes by, the denaturation of protein and the blood breakdown, also the bacterial reaction, everything. Now, this area, imprint area, if made in blood, start have a contrast with the background. Because background, if no protein, no blood, don't form a breakdown, stay in the same color. Meanwhile, the decomposition of the blood, everything become darker, so now you can see it.
Now, you were asked questions about how you took photographs and visualized imprint evidence on June 25th. Do you recall those?
Yes, sir.
Overbroad.
Now, if you had more time, what techniques could you have used to, with respect to photographing imprint evidence?
Same objections.
Sustain.
Were you limited in any way in what you could have done on June 25th in terms of visualizing and photographing imprint evidence?
Yes.
In what way?
Your Honor, same objections.
There are three limiting factors. The first is the amount of time available to me. Second is the restriction. I wasn't allowed to edit something, remove something, or cut something. The third, of course, I don't travel with my crime scene van with me. So with that limited factor, I only can use a measuring tape and camera, catch the image, whatever available.
In terms of, you were asked, now 1337A is a photograph of a shoe print, correct?
Yes, sir.
Is there any doubt in your mind that that is a shoe print of a parallel line pattern?
No.
Is that a scientific fact?
Yes.
Now, other imprints that you saw on the walkway were not in the complete pattern of a shoe print.
I cannot come here to tell you those are definite shoe print.
Now, enhancement techniques, can they reveal more than just what one sees with the naked eye in terms of imprints made in blood?
Same objections, Your Honor.
Sustain.
Now, Dr. Lee, you were asked on cross-examination questions about, oh, withdrawn. And finally, on 598A, where you've put the yellow marker, you've indicated that what you see as imprint evidence is something in this row of tiles that is leading in a trail back to the rear of the Bundy location.
Leading in the state's testimony.
Sustained. Sustained.
In which direction, just visualizing in this photograph, looking from the yellow arrow towards the step area. Between those two markings, the yellow arrow and the step area, do you see a series of images that could be imprint evidence?
Yes.
Could that be consistent with a trail of imprints heading out the back of the Bundy location?
Calls for speculation, Your Honor.
Overruled.
It could be consistent. I cannot tell you exactly what pattern, what type of imprint.
Dr. Lee, you were asked a series of questions about the absence of evidence in crime scene techniques. You recall that?
Yes.
And
The state's testimony motions.
Overruled.
you mentioned in your chart before something known as recognition.
If counsel's not going to ask questions
Overruled.
and ask him about the chart, he should be allowed to take a stand.
Overruled.
You recall your discussion before on cross-examination about recognition
Yes,
and collection, preservation, and documentation.
that's correct.
All right? Now, in terms of the absence of evidence, if imprints are not recognized, documented, preserved, and collected by criminalists, does that mean they are not there?
Beyond the scope argument.
Overruled.
No, they're not. Definitely not means not there. Maybe presence. However, lack of a documentation, enhancement, or collection, nothing I can do about it.
Motion to strike the last part of his answer.
Overruled.
Now, with respect to the imprints on the envelope and the piece of paper, you were asked some questions in cross-examination about cuffs and fabric. You recall that?
Yes, sir.
Now, you examined Mr. Goldman's boot.
Yes.
Could Mr. Goldman's boot be the source of the parallel line imprints?
Asked and answered beyond the scope.
Overruled.
Mr. Goldman's shirt, could that be the source of the parallel line imprints?
Asked and answered beyond the scope.
Was asked and answered once before, Counsel.
I'm sorry?
We have that question and answer in the record
I
already.
understand that, but this is
right,
redirect
if you
examination based on fabrics.
It's already there. It's redundant.
We could say that about, this is,
Proceed.
we could say that about everything.
Proceed.
All right. You were asked about fabrics making imprints. You recall that on cross-examination.
Yes, sir.
Is there any fabric that you found at the crime scene that could have made the imprints on the envelope and the piece of paper?
Asked and answered.
Overruled.
No, I did not observe any similar pattern.
And in cross-examination, you were asked about fabrics making such an imprint, and you said something about the necessity in these imprints on the envelope and the piece of paper for direct contact and a certain amount of force and no movement. You recall that?
Overruled.
Yes, I do recall.
Could you please explain that answer to the jury?
In order to get this transfer, first thing on the surface have to have liquid blood, a pattern. And the amount has to be just right. Something has to be have similar pattern, which have to apply to the surface with certain pressure. I did not see any movement. In other words, it's not a smear. It has to be direct application with certain pressure, just like when you stamp something.
I think we're finished with this. Dr. Lee, you were asked certain questions on cross-examination about DNA testing. You recall those?
DNA?
DNA.
Yes.
Dr. Lee, are there correct ways to do DNA testing and incorrect ways to do DNA testing?
Yes.
All right? And if DNA testing is done properly, in your opinion, with RFLP and PCR, can it be reliable evidence?
That's my position all the time. DNA, if do properly, correctly, should be used as evidence.
All right? If done improperly, can it be unreliable?
If done,
Beyond the scope.
Oral.
if done improperly, them should not be used.
You were asked questions about forensic scientists, molecular biologists, and having a say as to proper DNA methods. You recall those questions?
Yes.
And you said that forensic scientists should have a say on the methods that are used for the forensic application of DNA testing.
Oral.
As a forensic scientist, definitely any...
Hold on. Dr. Lee, the question was, do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
Next question.
And you were asked about, well, let me ask you, in terms of, you said, and is it your opinion, what is your opinion about about forensic scientists and whether they should have a say in terms of what are the proper methods for doing forensic DNA testing?
What I'm saying, as a forensic scientist, we're the one conduct the testing, we're the one look at the sample, we're the one evaluate the sample. So therefore, as a forensic scientist, we should have some saying in a committee, in a national meeting, international meeting, determine the procedure, the method, and the type of analysis we perform. As a forensic scientist, we should have some saying. That shouldn't be just by other field of expert to dictate what we have to do.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the role of molecular geneticists and population geneticists who are from clinical testing and academia, do they have a role as well?
They all have certain role, even attorneys also have the certain roles in the DNA applications.
And the NRC panel in which you served had representatives from all these groups.
Yes, sir.
Now, you were shown a picture that's 596 on cross-examination of the socks in Mr. Simpson's bedroom. You recall that?
Yes, sir.
And you indicated that that was the best quality photograph you'd been able to see prior to this occasion.
Yes. That's an excellent photo.
See any blood on those socks, Dr. Lee?
Objection.
Oral.
Calls for speculation.
Oral.
I cannot determine any blood stain on there or not.
I didn't hear the last part of the answer.
So you cannot determine
Determine.
any blood stain on there or not.
Dr. Lee, you know Professor Herbert McDonald.
Yes.
And what is your opinion of his expertise?
Beyond the scope.
Sustain.
Well, you were asked questions on cross-examination about Professor McDonald and interpretations of the stains found on the sock.
Yes.
And what is your opinion of Professor McDonald and his expertise in the area of bloodstain interpretation?
Beyond the scope.
Oral.
He have a great amount of experience and did a lot of experiment in the past, published a book involving interpretation of the blood stain analysis.
And did you examine the socks with Professor McDonald?
Yes, we did.
All right. Did you see the red balls depicted in photomicrographs that he testified about?
Yes,
You take those pictures?
I took those pictures.
Do you agree with the testimony of Professor McDonald that in terms of the mode of transfer, which I believe was the form of the question on cross-examination, that the mode of transfer here with respect to the ankle stain on the sock was side 2 having come into contact with side 3?
Misstates the evidence, also calls for speculation, no foundation.
Oral.
Yes,
Now, you were asked some questions on cross-examination about hair and trace evidence in the soil exemplar and other samples. You recall those?
that's correct.
And you recall some testimony, some questions on cross-examination about hair and trace evidence in the jury box.
Yes,
Now, Dr. Lee, if one were to drop a garment of some sort into the jury box area, would it be likely that hair and trace from some members of the jury panel might adhere to that garment if collected later?
Calls for speculation beyond the scope.
Oral.
in theory, if I have a transfer, have a contact, if the receiving surface and deposit surface both have hair or fiber, now you have a cross transfer.
Now, you were asked some questions with respect to linkage. You recall those, four-way linkage?
Yes, sir.
Now, in terms of trace evidence and linkage, does the integrity of the evidence collection have some importance in terms of forming links in that four-way linkage diagram?
Vague as to integrity of evidence.
Oral.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
If those trace evidence was not preserved properly, collect properly, things can missing, things can get cross-contaminated, a false linkage may be resolved.
And in terms of problems in recognition, preservation, collection, and documentation, if there is contamination of evidence or failure to recognize evidence, can that affect that four-way linkage?
Vague, Your Honor.
Oral.
Yes,
And if some links in that four-way linkage, if withdrawn, if some evidence is not even genuine, can that affect the four-way linkage?
Your Honor, I object. That's argument.
Sustained.
We have the boot.
All right, Mr. Harris, which exhibit is this?
I think this was a People's exhibit. I don't, maybe up on the top right hand. Did you use this picture, Hank, or did you just? Your Honor, this is a series of 3 photographs that I know was shown to the witness on cross-examination, but
Yes, it
apparently.
was.
step down.
Mrs. Robertson? I'm sorry.
We have that as 594.
All right, 594. Dr. Lee.
Dr. Lee, you were asked some questions with respect to these cuts on the boot. Do you recall those?
Yes.
And you were given some hypothetical about riding bicycles or reclining in chairs, things of that nature. You recall that?
Yes, sir.
Well, first, let me ask you, pointing to the photograph on the upper left-hand side of that cut, was that made with a sharp instrument?
Yes.
Also speculation.
Oh,
Also asked and answered.
oh,
Is that, in your opinion, a fresh cut?
Yes.
Asked and answered beyond the scope.
we have gone through this part.
What is the relationship between, if any, that you can see, between the damage caused by the one that we'll call the left-hand photograph, the penetrating cut, and the damage on the other boot?
Speculation, no foundation.
Oh,
These two damage are different. This one and this one are different type of damage.
What are the differences?
This is a definitive and sharp. A piece of a rubber-like material separate, disappear from the surface. This one is much superficial in a slightly wavy pattern. Debris appears to form into this wavy pattern. Here, no debris can be observed. So the force-wise, this much greater force, sharper instrument.
And is there any question you were asked on cross-examination that changes your opinion that this is a fresh cut with a sharp instrument?
No, will not change my observation.
Thank you.
Mr. Harris?
Sally, you were asked some questions about the Bruno Magli, what has been identified as the Bruno Magli shoe print, correct?
Well, actually, this is mistakes of testimony.
Oh,
Now, and in the course of your answers, you were discussing the need for side-by-side comparisons. You remember those answers in cross-examination?
Yes.
Could you please explain that?
If we see an imprint at the scene, if we see that imprint, if we document that, now we have an imprint evidence. That's called a question evidence. We don't know where they come from. We can identify, say this is a Bruno Magna or Reebok or Converse, that's called identification. Or after our shoes, that's called identification. Now you need a known shoes to compare side by side. That's called comparison. When we compare side by side, not only look at the size, dimension, pattern, those called general characteristics. Just give you a general thing. Just like you at the scene, you see a fingerprint, that's a general characteristic, a fingerprint. To establish individualization, you need a known fingerprint from somebody to make a comparison, either the same or they're different. So for a imprint evidence or made of a shoe, we need a shoe to compare side by side. If we can link that shoe to that imprint, then that's called achieve individualization.
Now, Dr. Lee, you were asked some questions on cross-examination with respect to the transfer stains on the bindle from item 47. You recall those?
Yes.
And you were also asked some questions about some charts that appear in a publication entitled Experiments in Practical Exercise and Bloodstain Pattern Analysis by Labor and Epstein. You recall that?
Yes.
Your Honor, I don't know if Mr. Goldberg marked these. I know he showed them to the witness. If not, I'll mark them. I don't know what.
I don't
we have a
recollect
number
they
on
were
it.
marked.
592?
Wasn't one.
Was not marked? All right, then I'd like to mark this as defendant's next in order.
1363.
1363?
1363.
1363.
Thank you, I thought he said. It's the hearing that goes first, is that? May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Dr. Lee, are you familiar with this study of drying times?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Goldberg asked you about drying times with different kinds of materials under different conditions. Do you recall that?
Yes.
All right. Now, on this study are a series of experiments performed for different amounts of blood.
Yes.
One being a single drop, one being 1 milliliter of blood, one being 5 milliliters of blood, one being 100 milliliters of blood.
Yes, sir.
And then there are a series of materials listed on the chart. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And out of the materials listed, which one would be the most comparable to the swatches at issue in this case?
Objection calls for speculation.
Cotton cloth.
Now, what are the drying times for a single drop of blood under the 3 different conditions for cotton cloth?
Ask and answer.
It says condition 1, 55 minute, condition 2, 50 minute, condition 3, 350 minute.
All right? And 350 minutes would be,
Approximately 6 some hours.
and,
Little under 6 hours.
okay. Now, in terms of this experiment, what is condition 3? What in terms of temperature, humidity, what is condition 3?
Condition 3 appear in this handout. Laboratory cold room with good air movement, temperature 38 degree Fahrenheit, plus minus 0.1 degree, relative humidity 80% plus minus 6%.
Well, in plain English, is that a cold, damp room?
Yes, sir.
Is that something close to precipitation?
Yes, sir.
Now, what about condition 1 and condition 2?
Condition 1 says laboratory work table with normal room, air circulation, temperature 75 degree Fahrenheit plus minus 2 degree. Relative humidity 44% plus minus 2%.
Would that be what would be ordinarily referred to as room temperature in a laboratory?
Yes, sir.
And what is condition 2?
Condition 2, it says drying hood with good air movement, temperature 76 degree Fahrenheit plus minus 2 degree, relative humidity 44% plus minus 2%.
So, for a single drop of blood then, under condition 1, which described as room temperature, the findings of Labar and Epstein is the drying time is 55 minutes?
Yeah, under 1 hour.
This takes testimony.
And under condition 2, it's 50 minutes?
Yeah, only 50 minutes. 50, not 15.
50.
50.
50. And is your understanding that each of the Bundy blood drops is a single drop
No foundation calls for
Sustain.
speculation.
based on photographs that you've seen? The so-called items 47, 48, 49, 50, and 52, based on the photographs, what do they appear to be?
No foundation calls for
Sustain.
speculation.
Sustain.
How many drops are there in a milliliter?
Irrelevant.
Can be a lot of drops. And let's say we use a 0.005 as a norm. Of course, it's variable. It's a wide range, have little drop, big drop, as I demonstrated to you before. Let's say we assume a norm 0.05 cc, that's almost 20 drops.
Dr. Lee, finally, you were asked some questions about the closed-in area of the Bundy crime scene, the absence of evidence and bloodstain patterns on cross-examination. You recall those?
Yes.
You recall that chart with the red tape you were asked to connect lines to?
Yes, sir.
And you recall the 4.5 foot by 5 foot
Rectangle.
partial rectangle?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, first of all, that description is sort of like part of a baseball diamond, insofar it's just two parts of the rectangle, correct?
I don't play that much baseball. I
Okay.
don't know a baseball diamond.
Well, let me ask you this, Dr. Lee. In a closed-in environment, with hand-to-hand combat, with multiple stab wounds, with blood stains in different places indicating multiple contact smears, with vertical droplets in the areas of the different multiple contact smears, with other blood spatter cast off in different directions, with the key in one area, beeper in another area. In that kind of struggle, do you have an opinion as to whether or not an assailant or assailants would be covered with blood from the struggle?
Misstates the testimony and calls for speculation.
Over.
Incomplete hypothetical.
Over.
Yes.
What is that opinion?
In theory, should have some blood.
Finally, Dr. Lee, in terms of the fact that you found imprint evidence on the envelope, the piece of paper, Mr. Goldman's jeans, places on the Bundy walkway. The fact that you found it, does that mean it wasn't there on June 13th?
Argumentative.
It's compound.
Compound?
It's compound.
Well, let's talk about the wet transfer stains on Bindle 47. Did you see anything in LAPD records indicating that there was a wet transfer on the item 47 Bindle?
No.
Does the fact that it was not recorded on the LAPD notations mean that it wasn't there?
Assumes facts, not in evidence.
Sustained.
Dr. Lee, you made the distinction between scientific fact and interpretation.
Yes, sir.
Any question in your mind that the existence of that wet transfer is a scientific fact?
That's correct. It's definitive. That's scientific fact.
Is there any question in your mind that the blood swatches, such as we have in this case, after 3 hours, should be dry?
Calls for speculation, conjecture, no foundation.
Under normal conditions, should dry.
If swatches were placed into a bindle, something less than 3 hours, maybe between an hour to 3 hours, might they leave damp, wet transfer stains?
It could have been.
Are you familiar with the testimony of Ms. Mazzola and Mr. Fung that the swatches that they took out of test tubes were dry.
Asked and answered, argumentative, misstates the testimony, no foundation.
Overruled.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Lee, you said at the end of your direct examination that as far as you were concerned, the existence of those wet transfers meant that something was wrong.
I recall last week I did say that.
All right. Anything that has been asked of you in cross-examinations change your opinion about that?
Your Honor, I'm going to object, because that's not a forensic opinion.
Overruled.
Motion to strike.
My opinion still remains the same.
Thank you.
Mr. Goldberg?
Dr. Lee, you said that your own experience, personal experience with wet swatches in casework was letting them dry overnight. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then after approximately 12 hours, coming back to the laboratory and seeing that they were dry.
Yes, sir.
And when was it that these personal experiences stopped?
Personal experience stop? No, I
with the-
continue gather personal experience. Even today, here, that's another personal experience.
With wet swatches in test tubes. The personal experiences in casework with wet swatches in test tubes that you referred to on direct.
The last experiment I conduct,
No, I'm not asking you about that. I'm saying casework experience.
Your Honor, I think the witness should be allowed to answer.
No, he's talking, it's clearly casework experience. That was the question.
Personal experience, Your Honor.
Casework experience.
Okay, Doctor,
casework experience every day are, although I don't transfer blood stain every day, but my serologist, my DNA scientist, they all does that every day.
Non-responsive. Okay, motion to strike, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Dr. Lee, let me ask it this way. You said that at some point you have switched from swatches to threads. Is that correct?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I say if at the scene have a blood stain, we're going to, if something can move, I usually advise take the whole thing back to the laboratory. Move that. For example, this box have some blood drops. Just collect this box. If something cannot move, for example, deposit in this bench, then we scrape the blood stain. If cannot scrape, we use tape lifting.
Your Honor, this is all non-responsive. Motion to strike.
Overruled. Ask your next question.
Okay, Doctor, let's just make it very simple. When stains are removed from a crime scene
Yes,
by eluding them onto some cotton object,
yes,
is it true that you are now using threads as opposed to swatches?
yes.
Okay, now when did that change take place?
I forgot. I don't know exactly day and time, probably a couple of years now.
Well, didn't you write in some of your 1986 work for the protocol for Connecticut State Police to use threads instead of swatches?
Yes,
Okay, so is it correct to say that since 1986, you do not have any personal experience in casework with swatches at crime scenes?
no, that's not true. Every day we still, if the known sample submit to the laboratory, we transfer to a swatch. Still use swatch in the laboratory.
All right, but your personal experience in casework is checking the swatches 12 hours after they were set out to dry, is that correct?
Usually we dry overnight.
All right. And the purpose of the Labor and Epstein materials is basically a cautionary statement, as you said, to forensic scientists, be careful, drying times are hard to predict, a lot of variables go into it, right?
Yes,
All right. And you agree with that personally, don't you?
I agree with that. If a range, have a time of the range.
But you agree that there are many, many variables and it's hard to predict, as stated in Labor and Epstein, is that correct?
There are some more variable at the crime scene and more variable in the laboratory.
All right.
Laboratory should be a control situation.
All right. And do you have personal knowledge as to how cold, what the temperatures were at LAPD
No,
drawing facility overnight?
no.
All right. Now, let's get to one of your comments about, in theory, there should be some blood in response to Mr. Scheck's line of questioning.
Yes,
Remember that?
yes.
Okay. Would that also depend upon where the suspect was standing?
Depends on whether or not a combat situation, hand-to-hand combat situation. If at distance, of course, the chances for getting blood on unless some arterial spur or certain force, internal force or external force, if an injury on the hand, have a cast off or have other motion, not going to cast to a greater distance. If in a close contact, if large amount of blood come out, you're going to have more blood.
Okay. What I'm asking you is, in this particular case, based upon what you know, from your own viewing of the evidence, not from the pathologist, what does some blood mean? Is there any way of quantifying that
well,
forensically?
If I look at Mr. Goldman's blue jean and his shirt, one side of his blue jean have large amount of blood covers. If a person in a close combat situation, that should cover with blood. If do not have a close combat situation in a distance, then you have less blood.
If someone is standing behind the victim in this case when his throat is cut, would that influence how much blood he had on him, the assailant?
Yes, that's going to be a factor. And again, Ron Goldman's blue jean in the back covered with blood, which if assume those blood from original scene, a person have a direct contact trying to hold him, then you're going to have a transfer.
And you can't make that assumption, can you?
No, I wasn't at the scene, I don't know.
I mean, you can't make the assumption regarding the blood pattern on Ron Goldman's jeans, is that correct?
I only can see on the blue jean there are patterns, but I know the mechanism, but I really don't know what the mean of mode transfer.
Let me ask you this, Doctor. Do you recall one of your fairly well-known cases back in 1984 by the name of People versus Hoplinger, where a husband beat his wife to death by hitting her numerous times in the head with a brick, drug her body out to a fish pond, drug her back into the house, and then claimed that someone else broke into the home and committed the murder? You did
80% correct. Not the drag to the fish pond. Never got to the fish pond.
only part way.
A drag carry to a location, end of the driveway, and drag into a pack of syndrome to near the neighbor's house, then carry the body, half drag, half carry, put back in the family room on the sofa.
And isn't it true that that kind of a assault with a brick on the head by beating numerous times produces an enormous amount of blood, and it did so in the Hoplinger case?
Yes.
And isn't it true that on the suspect's jeans there were only 2 drops of blood?
Well, we assume that's the original gene. I don't have any record, but I do know he washed his T-shirt. I found a T-shirt washed in the pond.
Right.
But the blue gene, whether or not that's the original blue gene, I have no information and record of it.
Well, you testified in court, and those blue jeans were presented to a jury as being worn by the suspect, the husband, at the time of the murder. Is that correct?
That's a long time ago. If you say correct, probably correct. I don't recall. There are thousands of cases I've been working on.
Does that seem to be consistent with your memory?
Sure.
And
Fine.
only 2 blood drops?
I don't remember if you say 2 drops, it's 2 drops.
And the scene was covered in blood, correct?
Yes.
And when you testified, you didn't tell the jury in that case that you had any doubt about whether he was wearing those pants or anything to that effect, did you?
I wasn't asked as a scientist, I only can answer the question, whatever the lawyer, otherwise I will be stopped.
All right. Well, I'm just going to give a copy of the transcript to counsel. At page 397 of the Hoplinger transcript. Sir, do you remember being asked a lot of questions?
Hold on.
Sorry.
With the reporter, please.
if a person were to wrap their hand around someone's throat and slit that person's throat,
Yes, sir.
and the blood spurted forward, would you expect the assailant to be covered in blood?
Probably not.
All right. And, sir, if a person were for some reason to get blood on the front part of their body, however it might happen, during a bloodletting event, but not on their back during the assault,
Yes.
and their hindquarters during the assault,
Yes.
and they sat down in a vehicle, would you expect any kinds of transfers in that vehicle necessarily?
If the blood don't touch the surface, then you don't have transfer.
All right. Now, sir, you were asked about the imprint evidence a little bit on redirect examination. Did you read Bill Bodziak's report about his examination of the blue jeans, specifically the lower portion of the right leg?
I recall I did, but I don't remember all the detail.
But you do know Bill Bodziak from before this case, is
Yes,
that
he is
correct?
an excellent scientist. We're friends.
And he's a top-notch expert in the area of footprint analysis.
Yes.
And you have no specific recollection of what he said at this time in his report?
You can read to me. I can agree or disagree.
Okay, well, didn't you take that into consideration before you got on the witness stand and testified?
Well, different experts have different opinion. There are something called scientific fact. There are fact have imprint in blood. If he don't call that a footprint, I have nothing to argue with them. He entitled his own opinion. Each expert entitled our own opinion. Each of us have to live with our conscience
Okay.
standard.
And so-
Different expert can have different opinions.
Now, you said that in order for something to the effect that in order for an imprint to have transferred to the eyeglass envelope, someone would have had to have stepped on it. But is that true if it's not a footwear impression?
Something, as I say, something has to have some pressure direct applied onto the surface without movement. If this envelope on the ground, the more logical thing is somebody step on it.
But are you saying, sir, that that is a footwear impression now, or are you saying it could be any kind of
No,
impression?
I'm still saying that's a imprint. A imprint, say, is this consistent with a footprint? It could be a footprint. It could be other imprint.
And sir, regarding the item that you say that you see in the photograph that's on the 10th tile down and the 3rd tile across, you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, sir.
Are you forming the opinion that that is in fact an imprint, or are you forming the opinion that it is a possible imprint?
It's consistent with an imprint.
Okay. And consistent with means that it might not be an imprint, right?
In our standard, consistent means have this pattern similar to imprint.
Well-
It doesn't, if not imprint, I don't call it imprint. If definitely it's not the imprint, I will come here tell you that's not the imprint. It's a imprint. A imprint, which means something have a pattern deposit on the surface and cause a transfer. That's called imprint.
And that imprint, if it is an imprint, and if it's there, could be the Bruno Magli shoe, is that correct?
If parallel line cannot be, if a not parallel line have a Bruno Magli configuration and design, then it's Bruno Magli.
Okay, but in the photograph that you were shown of the Bundy walk, you don't know from that photograph.
Oh, you mean the
Right.
column 3, all those imprint?
Right.
I thought you were talking about specific parallel line imprint I show you tile 10. Then you're correct. I don't know what kind of a pattern it is.
Okay, so those all could be consistent with Bruno Magli shoes, is that correct?
Maybe. I don't know.
All right. And you were asked a question as to whether or not there could be a series of imprints to the, I'm going to say as we're looking down the walk towards Bundy, to the right of the center line. Is that correct?
I'm sorry,
To this
Counsel, you said
side?
we're looking down the walk towards Bundy?
We're looking down the walk towards the alley, sorry.
And this is
598A, I
A.
believe.
Okay.
Yes.
To the right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you know if there is in fact a series of prints in that location? Do you know whether it's coming down towards Bundy or heading away towards the alley?
I'm not that good yet.
What?
I say, I'm not that good yet, can tell you
Yeah, okay,
from
okay,
a distance.
Okay, all right. And with respect to the impression on the envelope, the piece of paper,
Yes.
those could be a fabric imprint, is that correct?
It's consistent with the imprint.
And it could be fabric, is that correct?
It could be a fabric.
Did you make test impressions from any of the fabric that was at the crime scene?
I don't have a fabric impression.
And usually when one is trying to make a comparison, don't you try to take an impression?
If I have to make a comparison, I did not do such comparison. I did some measurement between the blue jeans, the shirt, the boots, inconsistent with that design.
And, sir, is it true that there is no way to reconstruct whether or not the murderer's clothing is consistent with those imprints?
Oh,
Unless I get the clothing.
And when I was talking about these impressions I'm talking about, you understood me to be talking about the envelope and the piece of paper, correct?
Again, those are imprint, not impression.
Okay, but whatever, we can't at this point determine whether or not they were left by suspect's clothing, can we?
No.
Okay, thank you, I have nothing further.
Just one or two questions that I think will get us home. Giving me that look.
I didn't say a word, Mr. Scheck.
No, you don't have to. I've been here a while.
If I were you,
I know.
you want to let me ask my one question?
All right. You were asked some questions just now by Mr. Goldberg about trace evidence and blood.
Oh,
Now, would you expect in a struggle where shoes were in blood, in soil, and crossed a path where there were berries, to find evidence of soil and berries and even hairs and fibers from victims in a car if the perpetrator had engaged in a struggle and walked into that car.
Your Honor, beyond the scope calls for speculation, assumes facts not in evidence, and states testimony.
If the shoes have contact the berry, contact the soil, or fiber debris, in theory, we should see the transfer.
And you might not, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Thanks.
All right. All right, Dr. Lee, thank you very much. You're excused, sir.
Thank you very much, Your Honor.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our recess for the afternoon. Please remember all my admonitions to you. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves. Most importantly, don't form any opinions about the case. Don't conduct any deliberations till the matter has been submitted to you. Don't allow anybody to communicate with you with regard to the case. As far as the jury is concerned, we'll stand in recess. Let me see counsel as far as scheduling is concerned.